Hey, if you have your Bibles, go to Luke chapter 19. We're going through the book of Luke and talking about meals. If you don't have a Bible, grab that pew Bible in front of you. It says Holy Bible, and turn to page 872. 872. We're going through a series called The Messiah at Meals Giving Messages, and it's just about 10 times that Jesus had meals with people, and he sat down and talked about the kingdom of God, talked about who he was. And you know, whenever you want to get to know someone, you say, let's go have a meal together. And so Jesus at times would have meals with various people, Pharisees, tax collectors, and whatnot. We don't know all the tax collectors' names, but today we do. It's Zacchaeus, who climbed a wee little tree. This is a tree in Jericho, a sycamore tree. We went there last year and 2 years ago in Jericho, and some of us have been there. I don't have a picture of JT and Hank and Cindy and all that stuff when we were at this tree, but I found this picture. There's Linda and Chuck. See them? Yeah, I circled it just so you could see that. They're right there looking at that sycamore tree. It's probably not the same one that Zacchaeus climbed, but that is a sycamore tree. We are in Jericho, and so it gave us a kind of a feel of what that was all about. And so looking at that sycamore tree in Jericho was kind of fun. Jericho is a kind of an oasis. It's a desert area. It's just, if you go up to the high desert, that's nice compared to Jericho. It's just desolate. It's just a barren wilderness. And yet Jericho has this fountain of water supply, and so you have palm trees, and it's fairly green, although it's not as pretty as it could be. It did have a source of water. So back in Jesus' time, it was kind of a lush, like oasis in the middle of this desert. And so people would live there and enjoy their time in the middle of the desert. Zacchaeus was there. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, if you remember that. How many know that old song? Yeah, let's sing it together. No, let's not. But you got it going through your head, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, but he was a tax collector, and you know, they're bad. Tax collectors are bad. In the Bible, it's amazing. They call sinners, but then tax collectors, they have a category all by themselves. Because you read it and it says, and sinners and tax collectors. It's like they're just the bottom of society. Tax collectors were terrible. They would work for the Romans, and so they took money from the occupying government of Rome. And you're in Israel, and you're a Jew working for the Romans. And the Romans said, take all the money that we want from the Jews and give it to us. But if you want to take a little more for yourself, we don't mind, and we'll back you up. And so tax collectors had a good job. They'd stop you whenever they could. Say, hey, you're going on the Roman road. You need to pay a tax. Or they go through the market and say, hey, you're buying some food tax. Or you're out just walking around, you bought a nice little gown or whatever, and they, hey, that looks nice. You need to pay a tax on that. Anytime they saw anybody, they just take money. And people despise tax collectors. Nobody liked tax collectors. They weren't even allowed in the church. If you were a tax collector, you couldn't go and worship with other Jews. You were a Jew, but you couldn't come in. They said, no, don't come in. They didn't want tax collectors. In fact, this is how bad they were. There was a document that some historians found, and these are people that had some status, but it gets lower. You have physicians, they were doctors, they were respected, then a butcher, and then it goes down, and these were the lowest now, the lowest of occupations. A dung collector. You just go through the street and pick up, what's down there. And then you have a money lender. They were pretty despised occupation. Then pigeon trainer. But that was better than a tax collector. All these people were better than tax collectors. A shepherd, a pigeon trainer, a dung collector. But he had tax collectors, and yet Jesus said, I value this man. And sometimes you go through life and you just feel like, I'm not very good. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of possessions. I'm not recognized for all the skills I have. And you kind of feel bad compared to everyone else. And Jesus says, don't compare yourself with other people. I love all people. I made you. And I want you to be part of my family. And Jesus really wants us all to be part of his family. The end of this story, as he's talking to Zacchaeus, but the key is in verse 10, and it just says that Jesus says, salvation has come to this family. But then look what he says. Zacchaeus, the story is in Luke 19, but verse 10 is really the main thing. He says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. That's the key. Jesus says, I want to seek and save people that are confused, people that feel like they're rejected or they're not accepted. Jesus says, I want all of you to be part of my family. He says, I'm here to seek and to save those who are lost. And that's what Jesus wants. He wants everyone to be seeking to save. You heard that phrase, seek and destroy. You know, the military likes that. They find their target, seek, and then destroy it. Well, Jesus says, I want to seek and save. He just desperately wants to save people. He says, I want to seek and save them. Have you ever lost something and you really got to find something? In a way, that's the urgency that Jesus has. I have 4 kids and 3 daughters and 1 son. In my parenting days, I only lost 2. That's pretty good, right? No, it's not. But anyway, I lost my son once. We went down to SeaWorld, and they have this huge playground, just great place. And so I went down there, and we're with another group, and they're seeing all the animals and the fish, and we were going to do that later. But my 4-year-old son, he just wanted to play in the playground. Saw that playground and said, can I go play? And I go, sure. So I watched him, and then I went down and sat on a bench, and I'm watching him, and I'm looking around, then check him again, looking around, and then I checked. I can't see him. And you just ever sit there and you just get a little nervous, but you don't want to be nervous? So you just kind of check. And it's a big, big playground. And they have these tubes all over. And he could be crawling in the tubes, and they have little windows. So I just kind of casually go up, Andy. And I'm looking in all these tubes, and I see strange faces, but I don't recognize them. Andy. Andy. Now I'm getting a little concerned. Andy! I don't care if anyone hears me now. Andy! Now I'm a little concerned. It's a huge, huge playground. I'm going way down here. Andy! Andy! Now I'm running. Andy! And I'm thinking, oh man, I lost my son. My wife is going to be mad. And I go, where is he? And now I'm just kind of, Andy! And I go, man, he's a cute little 4-year-old with red hair. Someone was going to take him. He's cute, you know. And so I'm going, where? And then people came to, sir, can we help you? I go, yeah, a little kid, 4 years old, about this tall, red hair. And then close all the gates, you know, and they're closing the gates and they're checking out. And pretty soon, we got him over here. And I go over and you find him. At first, here, where are you? You know, you're just really mad. But then you go, my son, I found him, and I just, hugged him, and he didn't know that he was lost. It was just playing, Dad. What's the big deal? How you doing? Yeah. But, in a way, Jesus is doing that too, and he goes, I want to find these people because they're lost, and sometimes people don't know they're lost. And Jesus said, I'm here to seek and to save. Save you from what? And Jesus said, I'm saving you from death and hell and destruction, and it's a miserable place. And people sometimes don't know that they're lost. Sometimes they don't know that they're bound for this place called hell. That's forever. And Jesus goes, I want you to be with me. And he's out there seeking and saving people. And that's what he did. And this story is a lot about just going after people and say, people matter to God. They really do. They matter a lot to God. And so this story is Jesus coming through the city of Jericho. And so look at chapter 19, verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho. And again, Jericho, middle of the desert, bottom of this huge hill. You go up the hill, and there's Jerusalem. And it's greener and cooler. But you come down this huge hill, and there's Jericho. But it's an oasis. And Jesus is on his way up. Whenever you read in the Bible, on his way up to Jerusalem, literally, they go up to the Jerusalem on top of the mountain. But he's down on the bottom, coming to Jericho, and made his way through the town. Wherever Jesus went, it's kind of like, a royal wedding. I'm sure some of you saw that yesterday. And crowds all over the place. and they want to see a little bit of, the wedding couple. That's what Jesus faced all the time. Literally, people are just lining the streets wherever they heard Jesus was coming. And so he's going through this town, Jericho, and Jesus is here. Jesus is here. Because Jesus, by this time, had healed people, walked on water, brought those who were dead, made them alive. I mean, this is amazing. Got to see Jesus. He's walking through Jericho. And verse 2 says, there was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region. Now, remember how bad the tax collectors were respected? Zacchaeus is the godfather of the area. He's got everyone working for him. All the money funnels up to him. He's the number one bad guy, and no one likes him. And yet he wants to see Jesus. He's been despised. No one gives him respect, but he still wants to see Jesus. He was very rich, it says. And he tried to get a look at Jesus in verse 3, it says, but he was too short to see over the crowd. And you got an idea that this word too short, he was just short, extremely short, probably grew up just kind of made fun of all the time because of his height. So he didn't care about people. He'd steal from them because they probably mistreated him all of his life. And now he's a tax collector. Now he can get back at everybody. And they had to pay him. And he didn't care. But he still wanted to see Jesus. So he said in verse 3, he tried to get a look at Jesus. He was too short to see over the crowd. Verse 4, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. Knew the route. Jesus is going to come. So he's up on this sycamore tree, just kind of hanging on. Everyone's watching the crowd go by. And then here comes Jesus and his disciples, and Jesus is walking. He just wanted to see Jesus. Just wanted to get a peek at Jesus. And it says in verse 5, when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus. And that's pretty cool. Zacchaeus is hanging on to his branch, looking down at Jesus. Yeah, I get to see Jesus. You get to see that wedding couple go by and everyone's taking the picture. But you imagine if you ever had a chance and they actually looked you in the eye. Prince Harry would go, hey, or they'd wave and make eye contact, go, oh. This is Zacchaeus, because all of a sudden Jesus is walking and he looks up. Zacchaeus. How do you know my name? That would be pretty impressive, but Jesus stops and looks up. And that's the point. If you're taking notes, number one, as we talk about that we matter to God, this is what I want you to know. No matter how small we feel, no matter if you feel insecure, that no one pays attention to you, that no one knows what you do, Jesus sees us all the time. He knows where you are. He knows what you're going through. He cares a lot about what you're doing. And Jesus said, Zacchaeus, come on down. He reached the spot. He looked up and said to him. Jesus looked up and saw Zacchaeus. Jesus knows where we're at all the time. He knows what we're doing. He knows what we're going through. And he goes, I care. I care that you're brother and sisters died. I care that you don't have a job. I care that you're feeling inferior. I care that you're struggling financially. I care that you're just struggling with your self-esteem. I care. Jesus just says, I care. And he wants everyone to know, you matter to me, you care. I care for you. I want to get to know you. Just making that eye contact. He looked up and said, Zacchaeus. And he knew who he was. Eye contact's great. And Jesus just looked at Zacchaeus and said, you matter to me. It's a pretty big deal. Zacchaeus had not had anyone care about him his whole life, probably. Everyone hated him. The only time they stopped is because they had to pay him. Probably he grew up and people made fun of him all his life. And then he got this job from the Romans and he goes, yeah, I can get back at everybody. And now he has one guy, a teacher, Messiah, the biggest name right now in all of Israel. He stops and looks at him and goes, oh, why is he looking at me? Jesus is looking at every one of you. He knows what you do every moment of your day. He knows what you're thinking, and he cares for you. Not everything we do is right, not everything I do is right, but Jesus still knows, and he still cares. We matter to Jesus a lot. And Jesus just wants all of us to know that we matter to him. And he says this, and if you're looking at the story, it says this, when he looked up at Zacchaeus and he called him by his name, which is pretty cool, Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. He said, Zacchaeus, I know your name, and I want to be a guest in your home today, which is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Man, I need some help on this. Could you advance the slide? There's one thing cool about when Jesus looked at Zacchaeus, says, I know your name. You know, all of us have nicknames. I don't know if you have a nickname, but I have nicknames, and certain people call me different names. My sisters all call me Jimbo. I don't know. Jimbo! They're the only ones that call me that. I have a nickname for my wife. I call her Tori, Victoria, and I shorten it. You might have your own little terms of endearment. Well, God has a term of endearment for you. He has a little nickname. But Jesus looks at all of us and he says, I know you. And then the second point, right, this, no matter what others say, Jesus values you. He values you. He values me. He values all of us. He looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I'm going to stay at your house today. And look, he came down at once and welcomed them gladly. Climbed down the tree. But Jesus stopped. And people go, why is he stopping? And then they look and they see this little tax collector coming down. Why is that tax collector climbing down the tree? And Jesus is looking at him. They didn't hear the conversation, but they see what's going on. And Jesus just waits, and they have this conversation. And all the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. He's going to Zacchaeus' house. And that Zacchaeus probably had this huge mansion. It's pretty nice, but that's a tax collector. Why would you go to that house? Because Jesus says, Zacchaeus matters to me. I value everybody. Now, everything that Zacchaeus did wasn't that great. He was stealing. He was embezzling funds. He was defrauding people of their life savings sometime. And he didn't give a rip about that for a while, but Jesus still said, even though you're doing something wrong, you matter to me. I got to get into your life and change it. But here, you matter to me. I know what you've done, and I value you. Jesus values all of us. And sometimes we forget that we matter to God. We try to earn God's grace by being good enough, but we never can do that. Jesus said, no one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus says, there's no other way to get to heaven except through me. I'm the way, I'm the truth, and I am the life. Jesus is the only one, but he says, I value all of you. And so I know what you've done, Zacchaeus, but I still want to get into your life. And in a way, Jesus values all of us and says, you're special to me. In 1949, Billy Graham, who just recently passed away and went to heaven, started in Los Angeles. In 1949, he had tent meetings in Los Angeles. And the first meeting started out all right. People came. But soon the crowds came and reporters were there. And they started taking pictures and then promoting Billy Graham in their newspapers. And he didn't know what was going on. And then he finally went up to the one newspaper guy and said, why are you here? And all they said is, William Rudolph said, Puff Graham. That's it. But when that mogul said, pay attention to Billy Graham and promote him, puff him, suddenly they did, because this promoter valued Billy Graham. And he goes, I appreciate that. In a way, Jesus values all of us. And he goes, I want to puff you in a way that honors me because you're special to me. And so he goes down to Zacchaeus and says, I want you to be in my house. Going on with the story, it says, Zacchaeus then quickly climbed down. It says this, took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. Verse 7, but the people were displeased. He's gone to be with the guest of a notorious sinner. And they grumbled. Verse 8, meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I'll give half my wealth to the poor. Something happened between verse 7 and verse 8. Something happened. All of a sudden, Zacchaeus is saying, I'm going to give back the money I cheated people out of. So no matter what the struggle, and here's the third point, no matter what your struggle is, Jesus can transform all of us. Jesus can change our heart, can change our actions, but it starts from the inside out. And something happened to Zacchaeus. He understood who Jesus was. Jesus is the very essence of God. And he understood that. And Jesus transformed into this man who suddenly realized he was cheating people. He suddenly realized that he was going through and mistreating them in a way that wasn't that honoring to God. And he says, I'm going to give back my money. He said, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. Half of them. He had a lot, but he's saying, I'm giving 50%. If I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount. His life was changed. Most Jews grew up knowing the Old Testament. The Old Testament had some values, how you have to pay back if you've stolen some money. Ancient Jewish formula for restitution is this: if you frauded somebody, you give back 20% or a fifth. Robbery, you have to pay them back twice as much. Robbery with assault, 4 times as much. Zacchaeus must have known some of this, and he just says, you know what? I've been a sinner, and I want to make it right. I'm going to give half of my money away. I'll repay anyone 4 times that amount that I've taken from them. They come to me, and I'll pay them back. Something happened, and Zacchaeus suddenly came to a knowledge that he was a sinner. And I think that's the starting point. You have to admit that you're a sinner. The second thing is that he believed Jesus. You have to believe that Jesus is not only a person, but he had to believe that Jesus is God, the very essence of God, that he is in the presence of deity. And he believed that. And then C, and I go through A, B, C, admit, believe, and then C is that he chose. He chose to commit his life to following Jesus, to confess Jesus as Lord of his life. He says, I'm changing my life around because Jesus is a person who transformed me. There's a church out east called the Transformation Church. Pastor is Derwin Gray. He's a former NFL star. He's a linebacker, and now he's a pastor of a church. But he said, you know what? I was transformed, so I'm going to call my church the Transformation Church. But he said, it was amazing. When I was in the Indianapolis Colt, I would play football, and then afterwards, we always go in the shower room, and shower and change. And there's one guy, he says, he was on the team too. His name was Steve Grant. He says, I always remember Steve Grant. He'd go around, take a shower, and he'd put a wrap of towel around him. And then he'd go around the locker room and said, do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? And Derwin went, when he first started, he asked guys, what's with that guy? He goes, don't pay attention to him. He always does that. We call him the naked preacher. And he would just go around the locker room. Do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Derwin said for 5 years, I hadn't paid attention to the naked preacher. But he said, one day, all of a sudden I realized, what he's saying, he's living it out. I never hear that guy swear, and in the midst of some trouble, he seems to have joy and peace. There's something about him. I went up to that guy, he says, after he got dressed, and he says, tell me more about Jesus. I want to know him. And he said, I admitted I was a sinner. I believe in Jesus, and I chose to commit my life to following him. And he says, I was transformed. Today, I'm a pastor of a church, and I'm honoring God in many ways. The last thing, and the last point is, no matter how far we've gone, Jesus seeks us. No matter how far you've gone, Jesus seeks us. Verse 9, Jesus said, salvation has come to this home today. Salvation has come to this house because this man, too, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. Jesus just came to seek and to save all of us because we matter. We matter to God. Just a few pages back in Luke chapter 16, Luke shares 3 stories that Jesus shared. You know them, perhaps. They're all about things that were lost. And Jesus just tells us a bunch of stories about people. It's chapter 15. But the first one is a shepherd who lost a sheep. He has 100 sheep. He loses one. So he leaves the 99 there, and he goes desperately to find the one lost sheep. The shepherd finds him, comes back celebrating, just excited that he has his lost sheep back. Then he tells the story of a lady who has coins, and she lost a coin. And she suddenly drops everything, gets a broom out and sweeps and looks all over the place for her lost coin. And finally she finds it, and she's all excited, kind of like you and I are if you lose your phone or something. You go, where is it? I found it. You're just so excited. And then he tells a third story about a dad who has two sons. And the one son goes and wanders off and spends all of his inheritance money, wine and women and whatever else he wants, and then he's stone broke. Ends up eating slop that pigs are eating in a trough. And he goes, what am I doing? And he runs back home to his dad, and the dad is so excited. My prodigal son has come home, wraps his arms around him and said, welcome back, and has a party. And the point is, in that story, all three of those stories in Luke chapter 15 is this: something of value is missing. An all-out search is demanded. And when anything is found, great celebration. And when Zacchaeus got saved, Jesus says, there's celebration. Jesus talks about whenever one person comes to a saving knowledge of Jesus, there's a party in heaven. They're just celebrating because that's what Jesus wants. He says, I want to seek and to save those who are lost. And Zacchaeus came to a saving knowledge of Jesus. As you go through this and you just realize, you know what? There's a lot going on. Something of great value is lost. Jesus just has a point. Let God change your heart. And sometimes we have to get out of our tree. We're hanging on and say, hey, there's Jesus. But some of you just need to slide down the tree, get to know Jesus on a personal basis, say, you know what, Jesus, I know you're real. I want to be part of your family. I want to have you forgive me of my sins. And you welcome Jesus into your life. And he will welcome you with open arms and say, thank you, welcome, I love you, you matter to me. Others of us just need to have that urgency of telling people about Jesus. You just got to go around like I did, looking for my son. And what if I just, one time I'm sitting on the bench and I can't see Andy, so I go, hey, Andy. Well, I don't know where he is. And you just sit there. No, I had that urgency, and I get up and start shouting, and Jesus says, man, I want you to just share this good news that I bring you to as many people as possible and get out of our tree. We celebrate two today that have given their lives to Jesus. Like Zacchaeus, say, you know what, I'm a sinner, and I believe in Jesus, and I want to choose to follow him the rest of my life. And Jesus says, great, I'm going to save you, and then I'd like you to tell the world and get baptized. And that's what we're doing. Zacchaeus was telling people, I believe in Jesus, and his life was transformed. One of our goals as believers in Jesus is to tell as many people about him as possible. And we're going to celebrate this today as we close our service, as Jesus celebrated the transformation of Zacchaeus' life. We celebrate today just two or others who give your life to Jesus. And the rest of us, we need to share this good news to as many possible that are in your world. And so this week, for people that might be like Zacchaeus, no one cares about that person. Maybe you just go up and say hi. Talk to them. Because people matter to God, and people should matter to all of us, because all of us are created in the image of God. Let's pray.